Hi, my name is Alexis.
And I'm Anna.
And I'm Evelyn.
I'm Victoria.
And I'm Katie.
Marmalade Mermaids presents Season 2, Episode 2, Red Flags. Our flag means forgiveness.
When it comes to the word forgiveness, okay, so the story that comes into my brain is going to sound quite personal, but I shared it in my Communications 101 class, but I feel like it is a very important lesson that I've learned that I try to follow through to this day. So I'm really happy to share it. But the incident that comes into my mind is basically when right before my brother passed away. So my brother made this abrupt decision. At this time, we were all living with my parents, myself and my brother, and he made this abrupt decision to move out. He didn't give me a heads up. Well, he gave me like a heads up like a week prior, but he did not tell our parents. And they were really like, I had give him an advice of like, you should really talk to him about it, like at least kind of show that like you have plans and everything. He didn't heed my advice at all. He just, the day came and he just moved out. And that was really upsetting for my parents, specifically my dad, especially because of the time frame that he moved out. My mom was still at work. And the feelings that I was having at the time was a lot of like frustration, anger, and betrayal. Mostly because my brother was the only other person who not kind of, but fully understood what it was like living with my parents, especially my dad. And so it felt like an act of betrayal for him to just kind of leave me behind. He had told me that I should move out as well and everything, but I wasn't financially in the place to be able to do that or anything. And I felt like it was smarter to just continue to live there and try to save money, and possibly go back to school. It was like a lot of factors that I felt was better. Same for him, but I totally also, on the other side of the coin, understood why he wanted to move out. So, because it is difficult to live with them and you don't get that. Like it felt very, not just, you just don't feel like you had a lot of freedom and felt kind of suffocating. But so I understood his point of view. But so he abruptly moved out and I held a lot of like my negative emotions and everything during like that whole time. And I just never like I didn't think I was ever going to forgive him for that. And my mom, she's a very forgiving person. And so it was a lot of those things for her. She was just like, I'm going, this is something I can't do, but like, hey, like, here's some advice. I wish I kind of was more on her side. Like, I wish I had that kind of attitude. But I have more of my dad's attitude, which is kind of temperamental, unfortunately. And so, um, when the time, like, so it it got better. It got a little bit better. In the household. Yes, my dad was very upset for a while. I mean, I was upset for a while. But he started cooling down. He was still kind of avoidant of my brother when he came to visit, and my mom was the same, like just very nice and just talking to him. I was also very avoidant, didn't really want to talk to him, but I actually talked to him more than my dad did. And when my brother did visit, it's usually when my dad was at work at the time. Um, but the thing that I really regret was that when I started noticing the signs that he was taking drugs, when he was starting to do drugs, I noticed immediately like the physical signs and the behavioral like kind of things that he would do. And my parents, well, my mom specifically, she didn't know, she doesn't know about like anything about that. So I tried talking to them about it, but what was unfortunate was that I let my negative emotions flare up again, and I held on to it. And instead of forgiving for the thing that he did in the past, I decided to continue to hold on to it and continue to be negative and frustrated and angry. And instead of like pursuing, trying to pursue more help for him, I just continued to wall him out. And that's where I deeply regretted my decisions. And before you know it, he passed away due to a drug overdose. And I'm going to try not to cry. um, but the lesson basically that I had learned from all of that was that it's, and a lot of times it's better to forgive and let go a lot of like the negative emotions and everything, because most of the time when you hold on to them, it's not really in a lot of like situations, it's not really gonna help certain things, and it's better to just forgive and be kind and help and all that. And I felt always I always have the thought that if I like would have forgiven him sooner, if I would have just let go of those like negative emotions, I could have I could have helped him. I could have helped. I could have really brought my family together to try to stop him and have him seek out help. So it's a lot of those things that I think about sometimes, and I'm trying to also forgive myself for not doing that and everything and be more okay with it. But the biggest lesson I've learned, and I'm trying to continue on today, is that sometimes it is a lot better to just forgive and to just move forward and see, be more positive and see what you can do to help, and instead of just letting your negativity, your anger, and all that hold you back. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, it was a little bit of a downer.
No,
thank
that's
you.
the nature of it. And yeah, with forgiveness stories, I mean, you hear about lessons in forgiveness, but when you really have an experience with it, you're like, yeah, all of
Yeah.
those cliches are true.
hmm Go with the 1 minute recap.
All right, Victoria.
All right, so we find our Revenge crew, the OG Revenge crew, split between the Revenge 2.0 and the Red Flag with Queen Jane. And then the Revenge crew that's on the Red Flag is reunited with Lucius, who's been missing, and we learn about what has been happening to Lucius, which has been very dark. On the Revenge 2.0, Blackbeard goes into full nihilism, and trying to destroy himself and the boat. And Izzy loses a leg, and Queen Jing takes a liking to Olawande. And that's basically the episode.
All right. Let's talk about where we see forgiveness in the episode. Was it hard to find? Was it easy to find? Last time we found survival everywhere.
Why don't you start, Alexis?
I feel like there were some seeds to forgiveness, and it gave me a chance to really think about the concept of forgiveness a lot more. So that I'm looking for, in my mind, I was thinking, in order to, for the need for forgiveness, there has to have been something wronged, someone wronged, some offense taken. And so I was looking for those places and those people that, for small degree, large degree, had some kind of a wrong and how they handled it. A really small wrong that I saw was Auntie and Olawande, where he cleared the map and she was very upset about it. And that's just like in that situation, she is like, you need to get out of here. And he does. And then we see in the post-credit scene, she's like, I will let it go this time. And that kind of reminded me of like this idea of forgive, but don't forget. We hear that. Like, I will forgive him, but now there's a boundary in place. He can only do this and this and this and this. from now on. So that was one example.
The one that I really saw was Lucius kind of like, so in the same aspect of the structure that Alexis provided. Like we see that like Lucius kind of felt he was wronged by Steed with making his decision, and so he completely entirely blames Steed for all of his terrible time. And I think we saw a little bit of him like forgiving him with opening up with everything that's happened to him, and then taking Steed's advice of like talking to Black Pete, and then also trying to give his own piece of advice to Steed in regards to Ed. So I think that's another piece of like we saw Lucius forgiving Steed there.
I really like that like I just love your story, Evelyn, and I think forgiveness was a very conceptual thing that I needed to unpack a little bit more. I hold grudges great, and I do not trust people. Just don't. So it makes it easy to forgive because I'm like, I didn't really care that much to begin with. So I liked when Victoria set up a structure of like, what are some ways we saw survival in this episode? I had to conceptually think like, what is forgiveness? And for me, it was helpful to say like what forgiveness is not. And then in this episode, I could say forgiveness is not denial. And then once I kind of got that, forgiveness is acknowledgement. Forgiveness can be expressing pain and anger. Forgiveness is listening. Forgiveness is caring for each other and letting other people care for you. Forgiveness is saying yes. Forgiveness is being hopeful. Forgiveness is showing love. Forgiveness is perspective taking, asking and listening to someone else's thinking. Forgiveness is healing. Forgiveness is life. I already said saying less to life. Forgiveness is honesty. Forgiveness is communication. Forgiveness is brave. And Alexis said the most beautiful thing. Forgiveness is soup.
Anna, what did you think?
I'll start with the etymology. So I was looking up like the meaning of forgiveness. To give up, to release, speaking more about canceling debt, forgiving debt. That's kind of like the origin of it. And then looking at a definition that to give up the desire or power to punish. From a lot of the things I was kind of reading, I was trying to get my head around this. Sorry, I'm going to have like a lot of thoughts. I'm kind of hesitating because I have a thesis statement that I don't want to force everyone else to participate in. If you're like, this is not what I saw, but it's kind of involved. So anyway, I was thinking a lot about forgiveness because I chose this theme, but I don't know that I would have selected it for this episode. I do agree though, now that I started watching it, and I watched this episode a couple of times, I think that there's a lot of components of the beginning of the process of forgiveness that you see here in this episode. And then you also see the sort of resistance to forgiveness. But anyway, this is all to say that whole kind of like thought process led me to get the book Forgiveness by Matthew Ichihashi Potts. And it's great. It's amazing. And there's a lot of things I could share in this. We can if you're interested, but if not, like the summary is that he talks about forgiveness is mourning. And forgiveness is this position of non-retaliation, but that doesn't mean that there is the lack of anger. And that doesn't mean that you stay in relationship. And it doesn't mean like you just forget about it. And so his thesis is about forgiveness as this process of living with the new reality after whatever thing happened. And so then it's about how do you construct that new reality and what does that mean and how is it ever evolving and changing? And so then that got me thinking to my final thought was about the stages of grief. I'm thinking about forgiveness specifically as mourning, of looking at this episode through those examples of mourning and where people are in the process of mourning different losses. And if they do seem like they're in the position to begin moving towards forgiveness in some way eventually. And so that kind of made me really think about this parallel between Lucius and Ed and how there's a lot going on there, because I think the forgiveness process that I would identify, I think you can see happening over several episodes for both of these characters, with other people, with Steed, and then with each other, which again, I do think is really interesting, but I'll stop there. So those are kind of my broad thoughts right now.
No, that's really good. It hits a lot of the threads that I saw as well. And like this idea of the seeds, I was even asking, like, where do we eventually see the tipping point for forgiveness, especially with Ed?
I think that situation that you brought up with Auntie and Alawande is such a perfect encapsulation of forgiveness that we see expand over these episodes with different characters, right? Because Auntie, like, Alawande did something and he was like, ugh, I didn't have the knowledge and that's why I did it. And Auntie's mad. And Alawande is like, rightly so. Like, I can understand, like, my action was my action and it wasn't like horrible or unvirtuous. But knowing what I know now, I can totally get why you're angry. And Auntie doesn't like, I'm forever against Alawande. She's just like, I have to have some better boundaries in place for this person to interact with me and my ships on my map. And I think that that's something, yeah, what you're saying. I think that that's a great encapsulation of what we see happen with Ed as this, and, you know, other characters as the season continues.
We talked a bit about, at least for me, forgiveness is very much the person who was wronged. It's all them, right? They can choose to forgive, they can choose not to forgive. They can hold on to that. They can suffer the cliche, like, what is that? Like, you think it's going to be drinking poison and make the other person hurt. Like, it's all of those things because it's all inside of you. Oh, so the other person doesn't necessarily need to know all the things that are going on inside of you. They may never even know that they hurt you. And then you might have to go through the work of forgiving this person who doesn't even know. With Lucius's situation, I think he chooses to let Steed know, you don't even know what happened to me. All of these terrible things happen and it's all your fault. So he puts forth that, and Steed responds in a way to kind of make amends. And not everybody's going to do that with forgiveness. It's kind of a unique situation. And then we see that's kind of the back and forth. They start to build a little bit and like, okay, I can give you that. And then we're going to have this little tentative like relationship again. Well, they're just different forgivenesses. Like, we talk about like debt forgiveness, and forgiveness in the eyes of the law is different than forgiveness like in social emotional relationships.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and this is just me, but I think I would make the argument that I could see Izzy and Ed, that scene between them is an example of forgiveness. And I think it's in the sense that it's trying to resolve something and it's trying to have some sort of closure on the moment. I think Ed, again, in my reading of it, in my opinion, is maybe looking for some sort of resolution, not knowing how to find it with what happened to Izzy. And then the dream is really interesting, what's going on there with that. And we can talk about that later. But then kind of giving the gun to Izzy and being like, this is what happens is you're like killing me. And again, I don't know if that's fully forgiveness, but I think it's trying to make amends in some way. It's trying to say, like, look, I did this thing and I don't know what to do about it, because Izzy is the wronged party. But he's not asking for Izzy's forgiveness. He's not saying sorry to Izzy. Like, there's this weird, instead there's this conversation of, I had this dream that you killed me. And then is giving the gun to Izzy. Izzy takes it. And then Izzy kind of says, like, you need to clean up your own. Like, I'm not solving this for you. And you could say that, like, okay, that's definitely like a lot of the history that they have between them. But it's also like, I think Izzy's justified in shooting him or trying to shoot his leg or doing something else to Ed, and he doesn't do it. Now, that becomes a later moment, like that's different from the moment later. But I think that moment, like when it's just the two of them, like, again, like there's something interesting there that when I was looking at it, I'm like, I feel there's like elements of forgiveness in this. I don't know if this is fully forgiveness, but I think it's definitely the two of them trying to come to some acknowledgement about the wrong that happened, and then trying to find a way like Ed's proposing this one way to move forward, and Izzy's like, no, I'm not doing that. But then Izzy also like puts the gun on himself. And so it's very complicated. I'm not saying it's like in this nice little box, but again, like there's elements of trying to find, again, like thinking about forgiveness as mourning and thinking about forgiveness as non-retaliation or retaliation. Because again, if you're talking about like non-retaliation as an option, it's also like, you know, forgiveness is something that you would say is an alternative to an eye for an eye or something like that, where retaliation is absolutely justified because you've been wronged. So again, it's super complicated. My thoughts are not clear about this, but I think that there's something in that moment with Ed and Izzy that has some sort of something to do with forgiveness.
What's the, I guess that, I think it'd be interesting, like what wrongs, because I can think of at least 3 wrongs that are going on between the two of them.
Yes.
Just, I like your point about like maybe thinking, and that's why I've been trying to think like, this is so interesting. There's so much going on. And there's different ways to think about the forgiveness and which I guess pairing to focus on. So I guess what wrongs, I'm trying to figure out what wrongs I see between Blackbeard and between Ed and Izzy.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is it's super layered. Like I think there's multiple wrongs that are happening. And I think that there's a lot of on Ed's part of what Ed has done to Izzy. Taking the toes, shooting him in the leg, like all like ordering, you know, Frenchie to kind of like, you know, toss him overboard or get rid of him. Like, again, I think there's a lot of things that Ed has done directly to Izzy and that it's not a, I'm sorry about your leg moment. Instead, it becomes, I'm going to make this all about me. And I had this dream that you did this thing. And I was, again, like, there's something here where, again, he's trying, I think Ed's searching for something. And again, it makes me think about the stages of mourning, where again, like there's this anger, there's this depression, there's this testing, there's trying to get to this point of acceptance. That's what I see is happening with Ed. He's trying to get the point of acceptance. Acceptance for not just the Steed part, but I think acceptance for Blackbeard, the Blackbeard part of himself. I think that's what he's trying to resolve somehow and find acceptance about. And I think that's the part that's wronged Izzy. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's, again, like that's one of the components that I see is happening here. And again, it's really, really hard to kind of tease out clearly.
Well, one of the things that I also kind of thought about is like, especially when you brought up like, why did Izzy bring, like the whole idea of Izzy bringing the gun to his head is that maybe Izzy is also, you know, well, I think at this point he's fully like aware that he might have also like wronged Ed in a way where he pushed Ed into this like position, very much pushed him into this like
for sure
place and stuff. And that's one thing that like Izzy could also be like coming into terms with, like he feels as though he was the reason why Ed is this worst kind of version of himself now, instead of letting him become who he should have been.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. I think that's also there, the Izzy side of, again, like forgiving yourself for the actions and how you're participating in this really, really hard relationship that is causing a lot of pain to a lot of people. Yeah, I think that's a really important point because there's definitely some Izzy stuff going on there as well.
Yeah, I wonder. That's I think the other piece I was trying to put my finger on because of a thought is I wonder if people do things and you feel ashamed. It's like a type of shame for a thing you did, and you assume the person you did it to feels upset about the thing you did to the level of shame that you feel. And one thought I have is maybe what Izzy thinks he did wrong, Blackbeard's not upset about. And maybe what Blackbeard thinks he did wrong, Izzy's not upset about. And that's also what is this unspoken thing that's going on between them. And so it actually has nothing to do with the other person, which you were talking about too, Alexis. I think you brought with forgiveness. Like it's about what you choose to do. It's interesting how it can go the other way too, about the person who's been wronged or thinks, right? Or like thinks that like that person might not actually be wronged in the way you think you wronged them. And so now you're in this like weird Mexican standoff with like what you need to do to absolve yourself. And that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Like having this dynamic with someone and you think there's the thing going on between you and you think you know what it is. And because you can't have a conversation about what the thing is, then you can't actually get to the solution or which is the forgiveness, which might actually ultimately be for yourself, right? That Izzy needs to forgive himself for what he did with Ed and Steed. And Ed needs to forgive himself for what he did to Izzy. Because I think the love that they have for each other is actually so deep and accepting. The thing that they think that the other one's upset about, they're not actually upset about. It's a whole other thing. And I think comparing that to Olawande and Auntie is like the simplified version of that. Because it's a quick, hey, he moved my ships. Olawande takes accountability. Yep, that's my thing. Now we're going to adjust. And you really can just boil it down to that, to someone just saying what they did wrong. And Izzy, like I said, or a Cold War, like maybe that's a better way to describe it. Like Izzy and Black were in this Cold War, but it's actually about shame about themselves. And so that's really interesting. I just really appreciate the two layers you guys brought to that, because that's, I think, where I've been really trying to unpack between them. I'm like, maybe they're not actually upset about the thing that they think the other one's upset about.
Right. And you might feel like, I need to apologize, and like, can you ever forgive me? And the other person's like, there's nothing to forgive, right? Yeah. They did not choose to take offense in the first place. And I feel like if I was thinking about the opposite of forgiveness, could be holding a grudge, or it could be choosing not to take offense in the first place.
There are really good points there. And I think one of the things that when you look at Blackbeard and Izzy's relationship, it's so, I don't know, I don't want to use like psychological terms, but it's so knotted up. And the show, David Jenkins said like that Izzy's like a father figure to Ed. And we know Ed killed his actual father, right? But Izzy's trying to be a loving father. And I think when you love somebody who's going through some real mental challenges, even if they're behaving in ways like Ed is, that is totally abusive and not themselves, it's really difficult to see someone unhinged. And Ed is definitely unhinged. So whatever acceptance he's looking for and amends he's trying to make, or peace, he's not really going to, like, before he even met Steed, he just wanted to kind of die. He didn't know what was next for him. So he's got some real valleys that he's in, and he's in a dark valley. And I think that could also be a reason. Not that Izzy's so much like worked up about what I did and I need to forgive you and you need to forgive me. It could just be like, I'm seeing this person I love going through a like phase that I don't know that they're going to come out of. And in Ed's situation, when you're in that situation, like other stories I've heard in my own experience, when you are in a tailspin, it feels like it's 3:00 in the morning all the time. It feels like this is never going to end, and everyone else is going on along fine, and I'm not. So I think that like you said, Anna, it's very, very layered, and I really appreciate the clarification you guys have brought to these layers. But the choosing not to be offended part is really important. It gave me a lot of compassion for each of the characters and the really rough situations they're in. I think Lucius and Steed is a really good example, because Steed was able to see like, oh yeah, my actions didn't just impact me, but I did what was most virtuous for myself with the knowledge I had at the time. Thanks for letting me know. And I'm going to behave indifferently knowing this. And Lucius in kind did the same thing. And I think that Ed and Izzy also had that kind of an interaction. And yeah, I just saw a lot of examples of that when I thought, but it's hard because pirates, I don't think they care really much about virtue. That's not their big thing. So
I think that was a good parallel there, like the conversation between Steed and Lucius and versus the conversation between Ed and Izzy. Like if Ed and Izzy would have aired out like their their like ideas and thoughts of like what their feelings basically as to what's going on, would it be a similar thing to what like Lucius and Steed has come into? Because I think Izzy would be more open to possibly figure out some sort of solution maybe, versus Ed, who's I I see as someone who's just has been troubled, like in, I think in the idea of forgiving in general, especially like I think he still has like one of the issues is that he still has difficulty like forgiving himself for killing his father. And so it's caused this like kind of complicated person now. Whereas Izzy, who's been very much like thought like in the weird like aspect of the fatherly figure, like has been thought he was like thought pushing Ed into becoming Blackbeard again was the better move, realizes that's not the case and is open to try to talk about our feelings
Yeah.
and everything. Like I think that's an interesting parallel and it's kind of sad. It adds more to the like I think intensity between Ed and Izzy's like knotted up relationship.
Yeah. Well, and how many parent figures did Ed have that loved him? Like his dad didn't express or show a lot of love. And then Hornigold was not a parental figure, but he was the next like role model kind of guy in charge in his life that we know of. And there wasn't any love there or tenderness or nurturing. So Izzy is really set apart and they both express love to each other. And I think, yeah, it's just complicated.
Yeah, and that makes me think like the relationship is definitely knotted up, and I think it's knotted because of the deep care both of them have to each other. There's so much love on both sides, and I think that's what makes it hard. Because, like you said before, Kate, like it's fine to be like whatever when it's someone who like you have low investment in, you know. But when there's all of this history and there's all of this real concern about them person, and then like again, like there's genuine feeling about them, not because you're supposed to love them, but you choose to. I think then that becomes this piece of like, you know, forgiving yourself when there's a wrong that's happened between you, or then asking for, you know, their forgiveness too. Like, I also need to like make sure that you know that I'm sorry about this thing that happened. And so I think that makes it super duper complicated. But that then makes me think about the end of that exchange after Ed kind of goes back up the steps and he says to himself, he's like, about Izzy, he's like, I loved you the best I could. And I think it's really interesting. As far as he knows, you know, Izzy put the gun to his head and is now dead. And he doesn't go back and check. And it's again like that's his response to that moment when he hears that he's like, I loved you the best I could. Like it just breaks my heart, that thought. And then kind of going to that, like it makes me even sad now to think about it, but like to the very end of this episode where Izzy shoots him. And he's kind of like again, just thinking about what that would be from Izzy's perspective of also that, like, I loved you the best I could. And my best is like knowing that you're about to die. And again, that they both kind of get to those moments. And then after that, like have eventually kind of having some sort of resolution, but then kind of like thinking about like pirate code or whatever, I don't know about, but that again, with this particular relationship, like the only way to sort of release it is through death, or is through kind of like acknowledging like it's reached a point, like what I'm trying to say, like the relationship has reached this crisis point where death is is the only other solution. I just have to acknowledge like that was the best I could do. Again, it's interesting. I don't know what it means, but I do see that happening for both of them.
A lot of pain and healing. Pain in these situations, like how far do you have to take the pain before healing can happen?
I think it's set up at the beginning of this episode where Ed's in the room by himself and he's so sad and he has little figures and he pushes the little steed figure out the window and then he kind of like hesitates and then he pushes the him figure out as well. And I think that's again like setting up this mindset. And again, like he's trying to clean, it's interesting because he's trying to clean up the ship. He's like, okay, here we go, all these things. But there's also this malevolence to it because he knows that Izzy's still alive when he's having those conversations with Frenchie. And so it's like, at what point is he kind of at this point where like, I'm done and I'm looking for a way out. And I'm trying to like, again, when you go to the very end and he says, finally, I just think that's really telling. Like that's your reaction to what's about to happen. And so again, like to be in this really, really deep, dark place of pain, not that it excuses anything, but again, I think all of those conversations and actions have to come from that understanding that it's a place of, I agree, deep shame and excruciating pain for this person.
We're towing a fine line, right? But I just think we don't know how depressed Ed was before this, but whatever he was going through before he met Steed, it looked like depression to me. So he had some of these things happen before, and they've kind of revved back up in his life in a really big way, and he's gone darker. And to me, to know how the next episodes work out, it's really a beautiful thing that it's like, if anyone doesn't think they should be here, if anyone doesn't think that their lives are impactful, like, just wait, just let it happen, because the world is a better place with you in it. And even though Blackbeard has done like gross things and really hurt people within that same community, he's loved back. And the world is still a better place with him in it, even with the mistakes he makes and even with how difficult things are. And it is a lot about forgiveness. And he gets that from his community, and he has to give that to himself. And I'm just grateful that it's like true in this Looney Tunes goofy show, but it's true in reality too. That people we love, we want them there, even when they make mistakes, even when things go gross. At the end of the day, life is better with you in it.
Yeah, that's really well said.
It is. It's gonna make me cry. Because I totally agree with that. And kind of going back to my brother, like that's one of the things is that I think I would have loved for him to still be here, because I think if he got it, that like even when he was like in his what when he wasn't doing like drugs and stuff, he was a great person and everything. I really wish he was still here to this day, because I think a lot of good things would have happened for him. So yeah, I really like that, Katie.
I think that's what the show does such a great job of capturing, is the pain of being in that moment. Because what the people, it's interesting, like Katie, what you identified as like what the people around can see and what that person can't see. Which, and like talking and like Evelyn, like how you compared it to your brother, because it really made me, I don't know what the right word is. I felt this pang when you said that you were thinking about what you could have done different, like that, tying it to the forgiveness that you wanted to show. And to tie it back to the show, which is not real, but I think is capturing very real things, it doesn't matter sometimes. Because what Katie pointed out is there's all these people around Ed that are trying to help and that can see this thing, and he can't. And sometimes you don't. And I think Izzy really knows what's going on. I think Izzy's the only one that really, 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 really knows what's going on. And even he is like, I've tried everything. He's tried everything, even just loving and accepting, right? If we go back to like Izzy, I actually am, as we're talking, I'm convinced Izzy his ill will is not towards Ed. He feels bad about his actions, which I like that you pointed out. I think he feels bad what he did. He's not mad at Ed. And so what's going on there is now, what can I do to help this person that I really, really care about? But like Ed is so far gone, like he's in this. And I think that is really hard for everyone on the inside and everyone on the outside to really accept. And I don't know if there's an answer, right? I don't know if there's a solution, but hearing what the people, I think it's important, like what Katie has articulated and Evelyn, what you've articulated, like being on the outside and what that looks like to someone who's going through this. And what I really appreciate is that the show is showing what's happening internally, that it doesn't matter at some point. Like, and I don't know I don't know what the answer is, but I think it does such a good humanistic job or just a good job of capturing the humanistic elements that are going on here, because I think we don't always know what's going on the painful side, but we know what it looks like from the outside. And it's hard when you hear people on the outside, like Evelyn with her brother, and I think Izzy wanting so desperately to help this person, and they feel helpless too. And then that other person that's in pain is in a lot of pain.
Yeah, I think not to like discount anything that he's doing to other people or the ship or anything like that. But yeah, I think that Ed is just, I agree, in this extreme amount of pain. And I think that's different from episode 1, where you saw him really numbing and just kind of avoiding and like trying to find these other like superficial things. Whereas like, and like you open with this episode where it's like he's just feeling his feelings and feeling like the full expression of them. Again, not to advocate for kind of like going into things that are going to harm anyone. But I think that that's kind of like where you're reaching this point of like, especially like when you get to the very end, it's like just the storm, like the way it's filmed and the music and like everything else about it. Like it's just, I think, this concrete expression about what's happening inside of Ed. And kind of like this is just, and also too that he chooses to steer them into that. He's like, we just have to like go into this, and I don't know if he actually wants to harm the crew. I don't think he does. I think that he's taking the ship where it needs to go. And I think he's trying to get some sort of resolution, which is, I think, why he's then, pointing at the cannon to the mast, and he's, telling Jim and Archie, like, you have to fight. Like, again, like he's just trying to get it out somehow. But again, I don't know that the intent is, I'm going to hurt these people. And I do think it's interesting eventually, like you have to get to other episodes, but talking about the forgiveness about this moment that we see later from those people specifically is really interesting. And like, I think this episode has so much about forgiveness in it, but it's not necessarily an I'm sorry moment. The only person who says I'm sorry is Frenchie, where he's like, sorry about that, But again, I think if you're looking at the experience of forgiveness, I think again, what this show does really well is it's showing like, it's not one moment. It's not an I'm sorry moment. It's everything that's going before. It's everything that's going after. But again, it's like really about the person's internal process, and then like the community around it that kind of can eventually get to that point of healing through forgiveness. But again, it's not a straight line, although I wish it were. It's really, really complicated. And I think the show does a really good job about showing that.
Yeah. In my list, I forgot there was like more, but it was just all the things that I was like, forgiveness is this, forgiveness is that, when I was watching the episode. And one of the things that you just said, Anna, that I had forgotten to say was forgiveness is acknowledging reality. Like when you're able to really look at what's happening, like on that stoic kind of level of like, this is not happening to me. This is not personal. This is just happening. And I'm acknowledging that this is reality. That is movement towards forgiveness. And I think, we see a lot of seeds towards that. And then we see some of that actually happen in this episode, but just, it's big.
That's the end of part 1. Listen to part 2 for our sacred reading practice and character blessings.